It takes a lot of ingredients to fix or build a car, like cooking, but without the frozen dinner easy way out. eBay Motors has 122 million parts. It's always the right fitment, so you can follow any recipe to a T. Whether it's a vintage Italian coupe that's classic like Grandma's meatballs or a German luxury car that's as complicated as Oma's rouladen, to cook up something great in the garage, use the eBay Motors app or visit ebaymotors.com. Let's ride.
Holidays are here, and so is fashionable fitness. Gift yourself a Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 3 5G, a phone that folds in half to literally stand on its own. Pair it with the Galaxy Watch 4 for ultimate wellness and wow factor. Check health stats, flex personal records. Over 90 activities can be tracked, like biking, swimming, golfing, and more. Invest in yourself with tech made to crush goals. Holidays open up with Galaxy. Shop it all at Samsung.com. 5G connection and availability may vary. Check with carrier. Products sold separately.
Hey everyone, this is the Almost World Podcast. Bringing to you mind-blowing interviews with guests from all over the world. So settle down, relax, and enjoy the show. Oh yeah, by the way, if you like the podcast, please support Elmo's World Podcast on Patreon. Your support is what helps the podcast improve more and more. Welcome to Elmo's World Podcast. Your host and I am with my friend Laura. Hey Laura, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Laura. I consider myself a agnostic, humanist, atheist. I just recently started my YouTube channel, Unapologetically Me, where I discuss just my whole journey through both Christianity and then Islam, and then settling in on just atheism. And I just recently got my bachelor's degree in cultural anthropology, so I'm working toward more academic goals.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about the basic stuff first. Like why are you in your past, did you ever have encounters or were like raised in a Christian family whatsoever, or encounters with Islam? Why you specifically choose those topics for your YouTube channel? And your journey to atheism?
Oh,
maybe.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wasn't raised in a religious household. I was raised in a very secular household. It wasn't even an atheist household per se. Religion just wasn't something that was discussed or taught. So I didn't embrace any sort of religious beliefs until my early 20s. In my teens, I was exposed to a lot of religious beliefs, and I was, I had my emotional sort of spiritual moments, but I wouldn't say that I embraced any specific belief. So then in my early 20s, during sort of a tough time in my life, like sort of an emotional crisis, I started going to church, and that's when I really started embracing Christianity. But I found it while I was able to accept some of the beliefs, I wasn't able to accept other beliefs, and there was just sort of a lot of cognitive dissonance going on throughout my entire process. So when I went to training for the military to become a chaplain assistant, I met an imam, and he presented Islam in such a way that it answered all my questions about Christianity. So really, my my walk into Islam was a complete accident. It blindsided me. It blindsided every member of my friends and family and community. Nobody saw it coming. But it was really just one of those situations where, hey, I have these issues or disagreements. I can't reconcile them, but I want to still believe in God. And so Islam allowed me that opportunity to do that. But then, of course, down the road, it presented its own problems. And I eventually settled on not accepting any specific belief until I had a good reason to do so.
Mm-hmm. What would be a good reason to do so, though? Yeah. What would be a good reason to believe in something?
I think it's going to be different for every person. So I tend to not get too academic or philosophical when it comes to someone else's specific beliefs. Like if they want to believe that something feels right, that it's going to be different for everybody. For me, I was so confident that if a God was real, any description of a God would have to comport with reality. So the more and more that the descriptions stray from what we observe in reality and what makes sense logically, the less and less reason that I have to accept it. I was really arrogant. I was like, you know what? The more I look into things, the more I ask questions, the more it will support my belief in God. And yet, time and time again, I was running into roadblocks where it contradicted my belief in God. And so there was a point where I had to say, at the very least, I just don't have the answers.
Mm-hmm. I guess when it comes to that, you're more of just, relying on, intellectual integrity. Like, it might be possible that it does exist, but so far the data shows that absolutely no God at all, right? That's what you're saying.
I don't go the hard atheist line of the data supports that there's absolutely no God.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that individual God claims, things like the biblical flood or the Islamic belief of the moon getting split and put back together, those kind of claims, I would say there's stronger irrefutable proof that stuff didn't happen, or that it's very, very not likely to have happened. But when you talk about just, is there a deity out there that's beyond us, I don't hold the strong belief that there absolutely is none. I just don't find the arguments for them to be compelling.
Yeah. That's why you call yourself like agnostic, right? Because you're not really claiming knowledge on whether God does or doesn't exist, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm comfortable with both labels because I'm a word person. Like, I love English and I love semantics and all that stuff. So I'm comfortable with agnostic and atheist because agnostic means without knowledge, and I don't think anybody on the planet Earth can claim absolute knowledge about a God. I think at best we can say that we have a pretty good idea of this or a pretty good idea of that. But
Mm-hmm.
I can also reasonably call myself an atheist because definitionally it's just a person who doesn't believe in a God.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I say I really draw the line between soft atheism and hard atheism, which I know is really nuanced. It's kind of getting pedantic, but I'm comfortable with either label.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's talk about I guess just classical theism. Let's say let's ignore all the specific religions for now and just I guess analyze just where we are, and it cause and effect. Let's say everything is contingent, that everything that begins to exist must have a cause. Then we have a creator, right? It could be an alien, it could be simulation or whatever, but there has to be something that caused everything, don't you think? Logically?
So I think, that is a very tricky argument that I think gets people really tied up in knots. But when we talk about causes in the natural world, we say, like, for example, these two elements combined to form this third element. The cause was the attraction between the negative and positive electrons and protons and all that stuff. And you can start to talk about what a cause is. As soon as you start to give that cause agency or attribute it powers outside of what we see in reality, it becomes a sticking point for me. So can we say that the current state of our current universe had a cause? I think most people would agree on that across the board. Giving that cause a specific definition, especially a definition that is so far outside of the realm of reality and what we experience that there's just no way to test whether or not that's true or false, that's where I think we get into really, really sticky territory. So when you say something like it could be a simulation, maybe it couldn't be. Maybe it's not physically possible. Maybe it is physically possible. But we haven't demonstrated either way that simulation theory is even a possibility, let alone a probability. And I would extend that to any sort of God claim as well. Until we can establish that sort of more complex game is even possible, there's no reason to suspect that it's probable.
But I guess you do concede that this universe must have had a cause, right? But we're not assuming or like presuming that it has agency or anything yet. But so far as to our understanding of how the universe works, right? Everything that that is must have had something, or it must be contingent on something, right? And you agree on that part?
Yeah, I think I don't know that I agree or disagree on contingency, because I think when we say something like the universe had to have had a cause, me as a layperson, I would say, yeah, sure, something had to have made it be the way that it is, right? But when you get really, really into what you're actually saying, you're making a judgment call about the universe as a meager, humble human being who is just now starting to figure out what the universe even is, right? So considering how little we know about the nature of the universe, that word cause is really, really sticky for me. Like, what does that mean? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I know I'm kind of talking in circles, and I'd love to give you a really concrete, nope, this is my answer.
Yeah, okay, but I guess let's talk about just basic truth, and it's truth to our understanding is it's just true or false, it's either something is or something isn't, right? And when it comes to the universe existing, right, and so far as we know, things that exist, that we have laws for it, and that things that exist do have cause and effect, right? And logically, it just doesn't make sense that the universe came from nothing, right? It's just logically impossible. Which is I would argue that someone would have to first make the claim that the universe came from nothing, and from my understanding, that's not the current scientific consensus. And when they do use that term nothing, which I think is probably inappropriate of them considering that people misunderstand scientific arguments so often, I think they're using it differently from my understanding, from the things I've listened to. Very few lectures, but in terms of Lawrence Krauss and some of the other physicists, that their definition of nothing is something, right? Their definition of nothing is actually something. When
you start breaking it down, all the arguments get very, very complex, and all the arguments start making presuppositions. And I'll give any theistic person or atheistic person, for the purposes of argument, you can have your presuppositions and we can talk about them. I try to avoid them. So when it comes to did the universe have a cause, I hate to be the agnostic one that's like, I'm not going to answer your question. But I don't know enough about the nature of the universe or what you mean by the term cause, because it could just be that what caused our universe. I heard a theory the other day that we could just be inside of a giant black hole, and that the Big Bang could have been an event within this giant black hole. I know nothing about physics or whether or not that's even reasonable or logical, but it's another theory out there, right? And so I'm very, very, very agnostic on when you get down to what caused our universe. I hate to abstain from argument, but very, very agnostic that we can begin to approach that.
Okay, let's say that you just don't know whether or not the universe had a cause or did it have a cause, right? But let's say it had a cause in the sense that something happened to create it. What that cause was is where I will draw the line and say, okay. Then let's talk about what that cause was, right? You might say you did say that it might have a cause. So what is this possible cause that the universe might have had? And for me, right, observing how the universe works, everything seems to be, I guess, to actually make sense, that when I put my phone there, I expect it to be still there after a few seconds, unless something caused it to not be there. So there's order, there's structure, right? And in how the universe works. And any, I guess, scientist, or quantum physicist would tell you that if something at least it was just to be adjusted differently in how the mechanics of the universe were to be. Even just the slightest change would make it all accidental and chaotic and just won't make sense. So verily for me it does seem to be designed, doesn't it? But I guess like how I would term it is that there's a sort of intentionality to how the universe works. Teleologically, everything seems to be purposeful.
So have you?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah.
I was trying to wait till you were finished, but have you heard the puddle argument? In Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
No, I haven't yet, but can you tell me?
Puddle. Okay, so the argument goes that like there's a hole in the ground and it rains and it fills with water, and then the puddle somehow becomes sentient, and the puddle says, "Wow, what a perfect hole! It was designed just for me," right? And the idea is that we already exist. So when you're talking about probabilities of what's the probability of our universe being exactly the way it is now, well, it could be absolutely tremendously mind-bogglingly minuscule, the chance that the universe could potentially end up exactly as it is now.
Mm-hmm.
But it's already happened. So the universe being the way it is now has a probability of 1. So when we start discussing the lack of a likelihood that it would end up this way, it doesn't matter because it already ended up this way. So now we talk about, well, it seems so perfectly designed for life. Well, if there was a universe and it popped into existence and it wasn't conducive to life, we wouldn't be here talking about it. So, I don't know if that makes any sense, but the fact that things are the way that they are don't suggest that they ought to have been a different way, and that because they are this way, there somehow had to have been some sort of agency.
So I guess like you're saying that, like if someone won the lottery 10 times, and they would say, their God must have like made you win this lottery 10 times, but it's just,
Right.
Like it was completely accidental, I guess, that person winning the lottery.
Yeah, probability is only discusses how things could be or predicting how things will be in given certain circumstances. But once you roll the dice and it is what it is, that probability, like, it's no longer a probability, it's just a reality. Mm-hmm. So they say the probability is 1, right?
Yeah,
that
I guess
dice
then
is 8.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I guess I would use it rather than just a justification for intentionality. I would say it's an indicator of what the essential things in the universe is. That there it indicates that there is something that it's pointing to which something that creates a structure. And I guess we might analyze it differently, but okay, I guess probability isn't the best like argument for intelligent design, as your puddle argument does point out. Okay, but can I ask you more about when it comes to just basic, I guess, why you don't believe in a deity, right? In a classical, theological deity. Someone who's omnibenevolent, omnipresent, all-powerful, that could have created everything that is.
So it's funny because you started with why you don't believe in a deity, which is like incredibly vague and open-minded, and you know, like it could have any attribute. It's just something greater than or above ourselves, and we can kind of start defining it. But as soon as you start defining it with omnipresent, omnibenevolent, what did I miss? Omnipotent, all those things. Now you start giving that deity very specific attributes. And so the more and more attributes you start to assign to the deity, the less and less likely it is that someone's going to just believe it off the cuff. Like, I shouldn't say someone, that I'll believe it off the cuff. Mm-hmm. The more and more that this deity becomes characterized by these different things, the more and more evidence I'm going to want that those characteristics apply to that deity. So if we just go back to, does a deity exist? Like, no attributes, just something that we would describe as a god. first, we would have to describe what a God is. So we keep it incredibly basic, like just a being that exists outside of time or space. Could something like that exist? Potentially, maybe. I don't even know if the possibility has been demonstrated that something can exist outside of existence. It seems to me right off the bat to be a very, very nonsensical, what would you call it, argument. But I'd be more willing to believe that there's something out there that we just don't understand than to say there's something out there with these specific characteristics and they have these specific things that they can do. And I only go based on what you mentioned, right? Like not giving it a specific God from a specific religion, but just this omnibenevolence. Well, how do we determine that this deity is omnibenevolent? What if it's malevolent and it's telling you it's benevolent? Or, whatever. It starts to get incredibly complicated. So going back around to why I don't accept that belief, it was really simple. This is going to be like a layman's answer. There's no really elegant philosophical reason why I don't believe. After I had given up on religions, I still held on to a general God belief. Like, there's a God out there. Don't know anything about it. Don't know its nature. I'm just a measly little human. Who am I to know? And then I was listening to Neil deGrasse Tyson, who said, gods used to define all these things. God was responsible for lightning. God was responsible for volcanoes, or different gods. The volcano god, the lightning god, the wind god. We were very animistic with spirits in all these different aspects of reality. And then as we came to understand reality more and more, there was less and less room for those gods. We now know what causes lightning. We now know what causes volcanoes. We know that a specific volcano isn't a forge for the Greek gods making, swords or godly weapons. We now understand it to be a natural process. So the way he explained it was, the more and more we understand scientifically about our world, the less and less room there is for a God. And so he kind of called it the God of the gaps. And when I heard that, it kind of resonated with me. So it's not that I instantly rejected God altogether. There is no God. Forget about it. I'm a hard atheist. It was more of I'm going to let go of my positive belief in God, knowing that it's contingent upon all of these natural things that I don't understand. Does that make sense? And the more and more I understand it, the less and less room there is for a God belief.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I guess when it comes to a God belief, right? There has to be most of my guests, who believe or who are theists, I guess, like experience the spiritual side of things, and some of them do believe in a God rationally, and they do bring their arguments, but most of the most passionate ones have had like spiritual experiences and demonstrations in their lives of God speaking to them, or them maybe having the Holy Spirit or whatever. What do you say about those kinds of experiences? Would you say that would you say they're just delusions?
So in terms of experience, I have a huge issue with this argument for several reasons. The first is we all have our individual experiences, and they're all very, very real, and we're all very, very passionate about our own experiences, but we can't measure somebody else's experience. So when I, as a Christian, felt that I was inspired by the Holy Spirit, or I had the Holy Spirit in me, or when I, as a Muslim, felt that God was present with me and God was hearing my prayers, though just within one individual, that was two separate experiences that I attributed to two separate things. So that's just one person. And when you start talking about other people, well, I feel the Holy Spirit. Well, I do too. Well, now I'm not a Christian anymore. Oh, well, then you must not have felt the Holy Spirit to begin with. Well, if I didn't, feel the Holy Spirit to begin with, who's to say you didn't feel the Holy Spirit to begin with? Oh, well, I'm a true believer, so I clearly actually felt the Holy Spirit, and you clearly didn't. And then you start talking about different religions. So even just ignoring what we know biochemically about our brains, like what we know about our physiology and how our brain functions. I mean, that's a whole scientific discussion that refutes a lot of the experiences, but just keeping it in layman's terms and how each person's individual experience is used to back up their own individual beliefs, and while simultaneously rejecting the experiences of others as being valid. That alone is enough for me. But I mean, we could get into how our minds trick ourselves, how little we know about cognition, how often our brains make mistakes. And that's like a whole nother realm that just, in my opinion, it solidifies that personal experience, it's a very, very real phenomenon for that individual. And so I would never tell an individual, you're wrong about your experience. But even my own personal experience was not enough for me to say, therefore I know the truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Well, right now, you are like I guess a humanist, an agnostic atheist. Can you define what humanist is and why you would take that route?
Yeah. So one thing about humans, this is where my passion is with like anthropology and all that. One thing with humans is that we are incredibly communal. Like we need our communities, we need our groups. And I found when I left religion that I really, really needed that, like a place where I belonged. In addition to that, our values are really important to us in defining our values. So, and they can be based on multiple things. It can be based on a religion or what your family believes or a culture. And so humanism is a value system that says that we seek to do the most good or be the most compassionate towards humans. And I would extend it to things like animals and the earth and being good stewards of our environment. And not all humanists do. Like everyone is different, just like Christians can all be different. But for me, it's the humanism aspect is where I'm finding common ground with my values. Whereas atheism has nothing to do with values, right? It's just, do you believe in a God or do you not believe in God? And building communities just based on atheism, for me, that doesn't have the same value to me as a community that determines the hard questions, like how do we treat people and how do we help people, and how do we be compassionate? All those things that, Christianity and Islam and all these Buddhism, all these other religions have that the secular community also has. It's just in the form of humanism.
Mm-hmm. So I guess that there's
Did that
actually...
answer your question? I feel like I'm rambling a lot.
It's okay, yeah. But from what I understood, you said that there's actually no like philosophical foundation for your humanism, and you're just doing it out of the subjectivity of your culture, I guess, or your present circumstance.
Yeah, I wouldn't call humanism a philosophy, although I mean, I guess in some respects it is. I haven't really learned enough about the philosophical side to really talk on that. Humanism for me is more a value system, like where how do you approach making value-based judgments?
Like
and
normative
I could say
ethics,
I'm not a
right?
humanist.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I could easily just say, oh, I'm not anything. I'm not an atheist. I'm not a humanist. I'm not even going to talk about it. But the reason I choose humanist is because I think it's important for us as people who don't believe in God to still build a foundation of a value system that other people can flock to, that we can build communities around instead of just every single person having their own.
Why do you think it's important to do that?
For me, because I think that we're naturally social beasts, and that when we get fractured and when we don't have a community, we tend to suffer for that. In addition to that, societies have to come up with normative rules, like it's not okay to murder someone, it's not okay to rape someone. Like we have all these absolute not okays. And then there's the lesser value judgments of when is it okay to lie, or is it okay to steal, under what conditions, right? And so throwing out a value system along with a belief in God system is like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Like we've spent thousands and thousands and thousands of years building our human value systems, but they've always been also attached to our religious beliefs. Like, we believe this because of a God, or we believe this along with a God. And it hasn't really been separated. I mean, I guess it has in things like Buddhism, where there isn't a God belief. But to me, having that value system allows us to build communities that work together instead of just all being fractured and not really having any cohesiveness.
Yeah, but I guess like the importance of communities working together and humanism basically is for survivability of the human race, right? From what you said. Because we prefer to have societies where because we're naturally inclined to be sociable, right? And we need each other to survive, right?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of, like, to be fair, I think there's a ton of overlap between, say, humanism and Christian moral values, like any religious moral values. I know that there's specific moral values in which there will be disagreements. And I think that's true within groups. Like, I think that there's Christians that have slightly different values. I think there's Muslims and Hindus that have slightly different values. So to be fair, I really think humanism overlaps well with a lot of values that religious communities share in common with them. So I wouldn't say, what am I trying to say? I wouldn't say that you have to build, I'm trying to figure out how to word this. I'm not denying that a religious community can have those same values, right? But in absence of that religious community and that individual still having those values, where do you go to congregate and to share those common values?
Yeah, but I guess, like, I'm asking, like, what are the foundational reasons as to why you would choose to have this specific value system, which is humanism? And you told me because it's exactly that it helps with the survivability of the human race, right?
Sure. And I mean, on a more deeply personal level, like, it better supports, I mean, yeah, if you want to get really nitty gritty
to the basics, right?
The basics, I would say, yeah, it supports human flourishing, and that really is just the gist of it. And why do I care about
can you
human
define
flourishing?
human flourishing, though? Like, what is human flourishing?
So to me, and I know it's gonna be slightly different for everybody, but for me, human flourishing is the most amount of I don't even want to use the word
well-being.
Yeah, the highest amount of well-being with the least amount of suffering. But there's a lot of caveats in there, so I don't want to throw that out as a blanket statement and have my words misunderstood by anybody. That means, like, oh, you just want all the good, not all the bad. What about a shot because it hurts, but it's good in the long run? I mean, there's all those arguments for all the nuances between good and bad and well-being and suffering, and those need to be worked out. And every culture, including religious cultures, have to
I guess,
work out
like,
those nuances.
let's say in a perfect possible world, right? Like, we do prefer that it is all good and there's no bad, right? And that's okay.
Oh, absolutely, sure. It's not bad to want no suffering.
Yeah, and that's
and
what we're talking
like
about.
That. Yeah, and I mean, I would never ever deny the subjective nature about it. Like, maybe well-being to you is different than well-being to me. So there's definitely complexities that need to be worked out.
Yeah, but I guess, like, so far from what you said, you told me that humanism's specific goal is to reach maximum well-being for the whole human race and minimizing suffering and pain, right?
Yeah, and like I said earlier, I don't know if I would diverge with many humanists. I think that there are probably a lot who would agree. I personally extend well-being to all things. I'm kind of one of those balanced people where it's like maximum well-being for humans doesn't mean I get to slaughter all the animals and exploit my planet. Like, for me,
so you're against speciesism too, right?
Against speciesism, like, in the sense that we are more important. So if it was between me and a lion, I would kill the lion in order to survive. So there is an element of speciesism that you can't avoid, in the sense that I put more value on my life.
Yeah, but I guess, like, in a perfect world, right, you would rather not choose between both, right?
True, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so when it comes to that, right, like, can you give me like a description of, let's say there is a possible utopia where everything is, they're all good and there is no suffering. What would that world look like, right? Are we all vegan? Like, are we all like, what would that world look like if that's the goal of humanism? I just want to know.
So here's where my black and white mind gets like, it just explodes, because there's reality and there's fantasy. So if we talk about
let's talk about fantasy for a moment.
Yeah, we're typically because we're imperfect beings, and because we're constrained by an imperfect reality. Like, it's very difficult for my brain to be like, hey, this is a perfect world. It's just not realistic. But yes, there would be a sense of harmony where people recognize the humanity, like they give the same value to other people's well-being, sensibilities, emotions, compassion, like that they would to themselves, such that there would be mutual respect. So say you and I disagree philosophically on something. In that perfect world, we would still have each other's best interests and well-being in mind. So while I may not agree with you that murdering people is okay, and I may stop you from murdering people, I also respect that you're an autonomous individual, and I would, how would I word this? That person shouldn't be allowed to murder, but they also should be seen as an individual with desires, rights, wants, and respected as such. So whatever needs to be done to remove that person from society, it doesn't have to be barbaric. I don't know if that makes any sense. I mean, in a perfect, like if you're talking perfect fantasy, there wouldn't be murderers, because if we're all humanists, we all want what's right for each other, we all want the maximization of well-being, then we couldn't also all be murderers, I mean, so it's very difficult for me to get into,
I guess, like,
headspace where
if I were to use your criteria for what a perfect world is, I would like imagine, like, let's say like a matrix, like every human being stuck in a specific world where they can get everything they want, and they have happiness, right? And perfect happiness, like, and zero maximal pain, or zero and minimal pain, I mean, right? And it doesn't require them to have interactions with other human beings, but simply the illusion of interactions.
So you say stuck, and that's where I get caught up on that argument. So if we were to, let's say, develop a matrix, and you could go in there and be perfectly happy. If you're in there and you're stuck, like there's no other option for you, you can't leave, it's being forced upon you, then that's not utopic, that's not perfect, that's not looking out for the other person's well-being.
Okay, well, when it comes to stuck, right? Like,
so I'm stuck on the word stuck.
But okay, let's say that if you don't know that you're stuck, and you're everything that you want is already there, then that wouldn't be wrong. That it would actually be bliss, right? Because knowing that this world is all that it is, which is the perfect world for you, and knowing that, and not knowing that there's another world that doesn't have everything that you want, then it's better to be ignorant about being stuck, don't you think? More, I guess, in terms of the value system.
So I wouldn't put something like that on other people. Like, if I were given the choice, do you want to be stuck in this, or let's just remove the word stuck, do you want to be ignorant that you're in this perfectly blissful world where you're only happy? I would say no, because I enjoy, well, you know what? I take that back. I may very well say yes. I may very well say, you know what? This is my time on Earth. It's fleeting. I want it to be happy. Sure, hook me up to the machine, right? Like, that may be something that I choose for myself. But it really does come down to choice. So when you say, like, well, let's take that ignorance thing now. Let's say we are in a simulation and we're totally ignorant of it. Well, at that point, there's nothing we can do about it. Or let's take the depictions of heaven, for example, where it's supposed to be like this perfect bliss. But if that person doesn't have a choice, it's like they are in heaven. That's all there is to it. And it's perfect for them, and they never feel any pain or any suffering. That to me doesn't sound like a choice. It sounds like it is what it is. So do I want that for other people, where they they are ignorant of the fact that there's another option. No, because
Well, I
that
guess
ignorance,
if you're I guess like if it's a problem that there's not a choice, then let's give people a choice, right? Like they could choose to live in this perfect reality and or not live in it, I guess. And so if
yeah, then I
that
go ahead.
would a matrix, like I guess like choosing to be in a matrix with a perfect reality for specifically for you, that would be, I guess, the goal of humanism, or that could be the goal of humanism.
That, but you're like inserting a goal there that isn't a stated goal. So it's almost like
I guess like I guess
almost like
I'm
taking
talking
it to its
about
extreme.
essence, right? I guess I'm talking to the extreme, of course. Like I guess when it
Yeah.
comes to the extreme, that's where the essence of a value system lies, or anything at all, really, right? That has a
So I
specific
think-
idea.
I think my understanding of humanism, and I'm sure that there are philosophers out there that deal with these like utopic questions, but I tend to, my philosophies and the way that I approach arguments tends to be within reality, and I tend to have a really, really hard time going into make believe. My brain just doesn't function that way. So when I talk about humanism, there may be philosophers out there that are like, hey, this is our ultimate goal, is to just everybody in this peaceful bliss, whatever. When I talk about humanism, I talk about I'm right here, right now, and there is pain and there is suffering and there is problems.
Yeah.
So what can I as a human being do right now to minimize that? So there really
Okay.
isn't any,
Yeah.
I mean, there isn't any drive to force people to be in like an ignorant bliss or to never, ever experience suffering. I think suffering promotes growth. So I think that there has to be this sort of balance between reasonable suffering and thriving and well-being. So for me, humanism deals with how can I treat my neighbor? How can I approach, like you and I have different philosophical views. Do I yell and scream at you? Do I challenge you? Do I tell you like, no, you're wrong and treat you like garbage? Or do we have this respectful sort of dialogue that we're having now where we can both disagree, but we can discuss our viewpoints?
Yeah, but I guess let's say
realistic humanism is.
yeah, but let's say you're right, that we're living in this realistic world, and that's where you specifically apply humanism and not to fantasy. But I guess I wanted to
Right.
explore the extremes of your value system in order to understand with the essence of it, and from what I've heard from you, you specifically had the criteria for it was one. It was the sensory experience by which is, I guess, that portrays maximal happiness, right? One is that, and the second is free. I guess the agency of a person is not where they have a choice whether to be in this reality or not. And I guess basically that's it. I guess I would say it's more of a hedonism, right? That's the real
Say that again.
goal.
It's more of what?
Hedonism. Where it's not a negative or anything.
I don't
It's
know if
just
I've heard
hedonism is basically
I mean, hedonism? Like
yeah,
being
hedonism.
okay.
Yeah, it's not a negative.
Sorry, I didn't know if
It's-
there was another.
Yeah, sorry for my pronunciation.
No,
yeah.
no, you're fine. I just want to make sure I was understanding you.
Yeah, hedonism.
I don't know, because that doesn't necessarily. When we talk about maximizing well-being, I'm not saying maximizing pleasure or happiness, because those things can be very fleeting. They can actually in themselves be very destructive. So I'm just talking about valuing another human being. I'm not talking about, shooting them up with endorphins and making them happy all the time. So when you talk about hedonism, you're talking about like, well, I should be able to go party all I want, have sex with whoever I wanted, like no boundaries, like do whatever makes me happy. And I think hedonism, if it's linked to humanism at all, it would only be grossly linked to humanism by warping it and changing like really what my understanding of humanism even is. Because humanism isn't just chasing pleasures. It's, I have another human being in front of me, and let's say this human being is a different culture than mine. Me assigning the same value to that human being that I would assign to a human being from my own culture is what I see humanism as being. It's very much more applicable and less idealistic.
Yeah, but I guess the final question for me on this specific topic about the hedonism and humanism is that when you talk about this matrix, right, of happiness, it's essentially it's just how our brains interpret this stimuli from the outside world, and I guess there's a specific balance when it comes to what should make someone happy, and also maybe just we could everything that is in that simulation could be reduced basically to a specific cognition or state, I guess, mental state. And I guess if that is where humanism, the essence of humanism lies, I guess it's just a specific mental state that you human being should have. And mental states are physical and could be physically induced and chemically induced. And I guess thus
manipulated,
manipulated. And thus when we talk about humanism as the goal, then we could we could actually provide humanism with a billion population with just let's say an invention where it establishes or like imitates or simulates, I guess, the goal of humanism and human brains, right? I guess you know what I mean, but I guess that's my contention. I have no say other than that. Sorry for. No, you're fine. If I could just speak on that really quick, I think you bring up some good points that talk about. I think we might be talking past or over each other a little bit, which is fine. It just requires a little bit of clarification. But also it talks about how we view and see different worldviews, and we might see them differently. So first, you talk a lot about happiness and how it can be chemically induced and all that, and I agree. But I don't think that happiness is necessarily a good measure of a goal, right, for well-being. So I'm talking more about how you treat and value other human beings, and you're talking about how you induce happiness. And so I think they're two different sort of topics, and they're very nuanced. And so we would have to really spend some time fleshing those two things out. Like I make my children unhappy all the time, but I do it for their well-being, to raise them into responsible adults. So happiness is probably not my first measure of whether or not I'm being a good, I don't know what I would call a good humanist. But the second thing is, you said humanism is the goal, and I don't know that I would agree with that statement. It'd be the same thing as saying like, well, Christianity is the goal, like getting everyone to be Christian. If you were to say that, I would push back on that. And say, well, is that actually the goal? Is the goal to make them Christian, or is the goal to have people behave a certain way or interact a certain way? Because you have Christians cutting off their babies' arms, like because they have mental disease, or you have Christians drowning their children so they'll go to heaven. And that doesn't represent Christianity, but they're Christians. So is the goal to be Christian, or is it to behave a certain way or to have certain societies? Is the goal humanism, or is the goal to try and strive to make our societies better, which I know is a subjective term, and that would have to be unpacked all by itself, right? What does it mean to be better? But I don't think that humanism in and of itself is a goal. I think it is a tool that we could use when we're analyzing situations or how we react to each other. Like, okay, how am I going to approach this situation? A Christian would say this, a Muslim might say that, a Hindu might say that. So I, as a humanist, might look at it this way, right? So I see it as a tool. Okay. I guess like from what you said, like a Christian, I could actually use humanism. A Muslim could use humanism. It's just a tool, and it inherently it doesn't have any external goal or inherent goal or anything.
And it's just a tool. Yeah, and it's tool. Yeah, totally. I don't mean to talk over you. I'm sorry. I get all excited when I'm in conversations. But in a podcast, you should probably wait your turn. I just totally agree. So I think where we talk about like what is the goal, we'd have to really hash out what that goal is. Is it a specific looking human society? Is it a specific range of opportunity for humans? Is it a reduction of suffering, if that could all be accomplished and we could still be humanists and Christians and Muslims and not war with each other and not kill each other over our belief systems, then I don't care if someone is a humanist or a Christian or a Buddhist. I care about how they treat another person. So if I as a humanist determine gay rights are important to me and all other religions around the world were like, yep, gay rights are important to us, then I don't care if a person is a Christian or a Muslim or a Hindu or a humanist. I care that they're treating...
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But here's something that I find like an issue, right? So you're an agnostic and an atheist and a humanist, right? And you said just now that humanism doesn't really have a goal or anything. It's just a tool, right? But so
my humanism. I mean, if you're gonna start
your humanism. Yeah. But so outside of humanism, which because your humanism doesn't really have an inherent goal within it, so what is the goal, or I guess the meaning of life outside of humanism that drives humanism, or is the fuel for your specific humanism? Because from an atheist perspective, I don't think you can derive any meaning at all. So where does that drive for, like life or good human interaction, or this balance of and respect and mutual respect between cultures and whatever? Like, where does it come from?
Okay, so it's I'm gonna have to unpack that because there's a couple different things. The first thing you said, what is the meaning of life, or the meaning of my worldview, or I'm not sure exactly what you're meaning. Were you meaning the meaning of life?
Yeah, the meaning of life. Like why we're doing anything at all.
I don't necessarily think that there has to be a specific meaning to life. Why we are doing something. Now we're talking about a complex set of drives and desires and intentions, and that can get very complicated. But let's just say, from my perspective, and not trying to get too much into the weeds, why do I have a desire to do good? I could just be pedantic and say, I don't know, I just do. But when you see the results of your actions, I guess you could say the meaning of your actions, it's a, I don't like the word meaning, because that says that there's something inherent in them. So why am I a humanist? I'm a humanist quite simply because when I read the description of what a humanist is, it applies to me, right? I want to value others. Why do I want to value others? Well, because I'm programmed as a human being, or I desire as a human being to see myself at peace and at balance with the world around me. Like I'm trying not to
that
get
did
too
sound
wordy.
like a circular argument, right? Like you're a humanist because you're designed to be a humanist.
Because and I don't even like the word designed. So but you start talking about things like meanings or the whys. I don't know the why. Like why I value human life is because I'm a human, and that sounds very, very circular, but I want my life to be good. And I want other people's lives to be good because it helps create a society in which life is good. And it helps perpetuate, like, if I care about my neighbor, I care about my mom, I care about my husband, my children.
Because and everything that you just said is because you're a human, right?
Well, what I'm saying is there doesn't have to be an inherent driving force that says you will...
I guess it's an irrational thing to do, right? To love your family or whatever. There's actually no inherent reason for it. It's just because you're biologically and evolutionarily attained.
I don't know why you would call it irrational. I think it's very rational.
Well, I guess like when it comes to rationality, like let's say that to human reason, right? I'm doing this because of this, right? Proper justification, right? So if you're gonna say that, I'm doing human things because I'm human, then it's sort of irrational, or just cause, then that becomes irrational, right? I guess by my definition.
What it is not being properly prepared for the question, right? Like, like, oh well, why are you a humanist? Well, crap. And it's a matter of
Yeah,
pulling a lot of these questions right off the top of my head. So
it's
forgive
okay.
me for the not being pre-prepared, and
It's okay.
it does speak to my newness in these kinds of forums, like
Mm-hmm.
in discourse and in having these kinds of conversations.
Yeah, I guess like let's put
so-
a pin on it. Let's talk about it
Yeah.
next episode. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that sounds good.
Okay, but let's talk about a little about Christianity and Islam. Like, give me let's Christianity first. Like, give me the gist of why you're not a Christian right now.
Why I'm not a Christian right now? Because I mean, the gist of it is the teachings don't make any sense. There's some good knowledge or lessons or values to be found within Christian teachings that are inherent to other teachings as well, but there's nothing that is just inherent to Christian teachings that's unique to Christianity that makes any sense whatsoever. So any sort of lesson that can be derived from it, like kindness or compassion or love thy neighbor, that can be found in multiple philosophies across multiple continents. It's sort of I would call it more human knowledge than I would divine knowledge. And anything that's specific just to Christianity, it's just nonsensical.
But I guess like when it comes to like what value system the Christianity portrays, I guess that would depend on whether or not their God or Jesus Christ is actually the Son of God, right? And if Jesus is the Son of God, then Christianity is the right path. Wouldn't you say?
So that's a lot of big ifs. So
Yeah, and I'm saying that Christianity is dependent on Christ being who he claims to be.
Right, just like Buddhism is dependent upon whether or not Buddha is who he says he is, and Islam is dependent upon who Muhammad. So all these different faiths are dependent upon these things that can't necessarily be proven. In fact,
but I guess people try to prove it, right? Like, about who Christ is. Yeah. Right. And I guess like you would be justified not to believe in Christianity if you have like proper evidence or proper reasons not to believe in Jesus Christ and why he is not who he claims to be.
So that is where there's a sticking point. When someone makes a claim, I don't have to justify why I don't accept the claim, right? So if you're going to claim that Jesus is all these things, he's the Son of God, he's our Savior, blah, 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 you're making a claim. And then for me to say, you know what, along with all the other truth claims that are just thrown out there without evidence, I don't buy it, I don't accept it. I don't then have to say, well, here's the reason I don't believe your claim. Right? Because I'm not making the positive claim that I'm not saying, well, you're wrong and here's why. I'm saying you've presented a claim, now back it up. And for people to not accept the claim, I don't think that there's any.
I guess you're saying that there's no sufficient evidence so far that Jesus is who he claims to be, or any reason for you to actually believe that he is. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. So studying ancient mythology, a lot of these myths have very common themes. They have overlaps, but they're all equally rejected as just myth. And so now you have these little pocket myths, like, oh, okay, well, here's the Hindu myth, and the Hindus are going to accept it. And they have all these, like, I'm going to back it up with this, I'm going to back it up with that. But from the outside, everyone's like, no, there's no justification for it. It doesn't make any sense. So my counter question, or my challenge pushing back to you, is what about the Jesus claim is so special that it requires, or that it is justified to be accepted on just as poor evidence, but it's accepted as true over all these other claims? Like, what about that claim with the same amount of lack of evidence, or what would you call it, anecdotal evidence, and the same amount of historical significance and the same elements as all these other myths? What about that myth is more believable or more acceptable with the same level of information as the other myths that you've rejected?
Yeah, well, maybe next time we could talk about the specific reasons as to why Jesus is the Son of God. Okay, but how about Islam? Like, you said you talked to an imam, right? Like, So
Right.
what have you learned from that, and what have you concluded?
So Islam, I mean, the arguments are going to be pretty much the same with Islam for me as they were with Christianity. Is you have all these like nuggets of what I would call wisdom, right? And we like to think of the wisdom as being beyond ourselves, but you have these little teachings like how it's good to treat people a certain way, and they're all great and well and fine. But again, you can find all of those little wisdoms that are good within Islam. You can find them throughout cultures. They're not inherent to Islam. And so then you start looking at the individual teachings, and to me, they just start to get really, really ridiculous. And so when you start to accept them as truth because you've already determined, it's almost like, hey, there's something good about this religion, and I like it, and I believe it. So as I start to learn more about it, I'm just going to take these other claims and I'm going to lump them in with the claims I've already accepted, and I'm just going to accept them. But when you start looking at them as individual claims, they're super unsubstantiated. They're ridiculous. Again, they fall in line with other myths that have been dismissed as just myth. There's nothing special about them. There's nothing outstanding about them. So why am I believing all this other stuff surrounding it when I can just take those little nuggets of knowledge that are good and like throw away the rest? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. I guess like let's take it for what it is, and if that's what you believe, okay, I would agree. Maybe that it could be in how you've understood it, but let's say that you are an atheist right now, right? And you are a humanist and agnostic. Like what to you is, like what would be what would be your specific goals in life, or I guess that the things that you stand on, like for example, like, oh, I want to be happy, or I want to have this is why I'm living my life. Because you sort of, I guess we haven't answered that right earlier, but to you, like, what is it? Like,
So for
why
me
are you living
personally,
life,
my purpose in life, why I'm here.
Yeah.
I love the pursuit of knowledge and growth. So while I'm here, for however long that ends up being, I want my life to be about gaining experiences and continuing to learn and grow. And it's sort of like, if you want to say, but that seems kind of, what's the word? Useless or pointless, because at the end of the day, you die and that's it. Yeah, maybe for every other person on earth, my pursuit of knowledge and my pursuit of experiences and learning and exposing myself to as much different like cultures and ways of doing things as possible is completely moot, right? But to me, it has personal value. It has intrinsic personal value to me as experientially. So my goal is to do the things that I'm passionate about. Like, I'm passionate about writing. I'm passionate about art. I love conversation. I find debate to be incredibly difficult because it does get very emotional. It gets in the weeds. Like, I have a very difficult time, as you saw earlier with the humanist questions, sometimes pulling stuff off the top of my head. I need the time to reflect on it.
Yeah.
But I love discourse. I love conversation. So
what if you're wrong, though?
What if I'm wrong about what?
What if you're wrong, about everything?
There's a huge possibility that we're all wrong, including myself, that I'm wrong about at least most of what I think is true.
So what if,
right?
would you face the consequences, or is it something that, I myself, I'm into philosophy and I dwell on these things. Sometimes I get depression, anxiety, whatever. Like, how do you face the crisis of you possibly being wrong, and the consequences?
So you assume that there are consequences for me being wrong because you have a presupposition that there's this possibility of this, like, heaven and hell, punishment and reward thing. I guess, right?
Yeah, but I guess, like, I'm considering all the possibilities,
Right. So what if you're wrong and it's Islam that's correct, and because of how you live your life, you're going to hell, or somebody else's version of hell? Like, there's multiple different versions of punishment in the afterlife, right? We don't dwell on the fear of that which we've already rejected as being true. So if you already don't feel like all these other versions of religion aren't true, you don't worry about the repercussions. Like, you don't worry about a trickster god, like a Hindu trickster god, coming and messing up your life because you don't believe that there is this trickster god out there that does that, right? You don't spend a lot of time worrying, like, if I please the wrong god, will the other god create curses in my life? Or, I mean, I'm just kind of pulling stuff out of my pocket, but I don't spend a lot of time fearing that which I don't have any reason to believe. So what if I'm wrong? So if I'm wrong and God punishes me in hell for eternity for genuinely seeking him out and genuinely wanting to believe in him and not being able to, given the brain that I was given by him that I can't help but have, right? Wasn't my choice. Then there's literally nothing I can do about that. But why is that God worthy of worship? Like, a God that would literally punish a person for eternity, the most horrible torment of burning and torture, because they didn't understand one specific religion out of thousands of other religions. That to me is the most abusive, atrocious God that I can imagine. So there's literally nothing I can do about whether or not I accept an argument, and there's literally nothing I can do about whether or not God will punish me for it. But I don't fear it because man's hands are all over all these religions, and I just don't see room for an actual deity, right? Like, I read the Christian myth now like the same way I would read Greek myths, and I don't spend a lot of time worrying about Zeus.
Well, Laura, it's been great talking to you. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. And
thank you. And sorry, I know it was very last second, us getting together. Like, it was planned for tomorrow, and I was in the middle of homeschooling, so I really appreciate you being flexible with me and understanding.
Yeah. And thank you so much. I hope you have a great day. Bye.
You too. Bye. Thanks.
So that's the end of it. Thanks for tuning in, guys. This is your host, Elmo Ador Jr. And thank you for listening in. And please subscribe. Please follow us on Facebook. Please follow this. Please. Thanks.
Now is the chance to use reliable energy to grow your money with the Dominion Energy Reliability Investment. Our new investment product offers competitive returns, no maintenance fees, and flexible online access to your money. Make the reliable investment in reliable energy. The Dominion Energy Reliability Investment. To find out more, go online to reliabilityinvestment.com. That's reliabilityinvestment.com.
This message is brought to you by Regeneron. If you have diabetes, listen closely because your ears could help your eyes. Excess sugar from diabetes could lead to eye damage and vision loss, even blindness, and you might not even notice it at first. So remember, now is the time to get your eyes checked. Eye care is especially important with diabetes. See a path forward with actions and potential treatment options that may help your eyes and protect against vision loss. Go see an eye care specialist and visit noweyesee.com to take charge of your eyesight. That is NOWEYESEE.com.